Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about fats for athletes. First, some important facts about lipids or fats. They are high in energy density. Fats contain 9 kilocalories per gram of fat. They are our long-term energy storage system, but they have many other roles as well, including organ insulation to retain heat and for shock absorption. They also insulate our nerves and help send nerve impulses, which is essential for firing muscles. Fats are required as hormones for communication and for expression of genes. Phospholipids make up all our cell membranes, so they're essential for that. And they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and a very small amount of oxygen, but they're mostly made up of carbon and hydrogen. So we need to burn oxygen to extract energy from fats. There are some other important principles that I would like you to be aware of. In terms of performance for athletes, dietary fat is often undervalued, but it is nonetheless essential for high-performance athletes. Fat's an extremely important fuel source, particularly for endurance exercise and long-distance exercises. But you require carbohydrates to help burn fats. So carbs and fats are required together for endurance exercise. Fat intakes are essential. There are essential fatty acids that your body cannot synthesize and you must ingest. And fat stores are extremely large. So let's just take a look at how fat is stored and delivered around the body. Fat is stored often in fat tissues as triglycerides. Those triglycerides can be delivered around the body, and fats that we ingest can be ingested and turned into fatty acids. Triglyceride is a glycerol moiety with 3 fatty acids. And these can be delivered to muscle cells to be burned to create energy. However, within muscle cells, we also have a store of triglycerides, of fats, that can be turned into fatty acids, which can be burned by our mitochondria as well. To burn fatty acids, we need oxygen delivery. And when we burn those fats, we will create carbon dioxide, which needs to be expelled, and part of exercise is breathing out all that extra carbon dioxide. Now, when we look at the energy storage for adipose tissue and intramuscular fats, triacylglycerols, we can see here that we have hundreds of thousands of kilojoules or 100,000 kilocalories ready to be delivered from our fatty tissues, and about 2,600 kilocalories from fats stored within muscle. These two combined, here we're looking at fats inside of muscles for about 2 to 3 hours. But when that supply is run out, we also have stores in our fat tissues that can last for many, many days, if not weeks. Now, as I said, certain fats are essential. Fats contribute up to about 60% of our energy needs, particularly at low intensities. Fatty acids are essential for immune system function, for hormonal balance, and for recovery post-exercise. Fats are insulators, so we need them for our nervous system function, and we need them for cushioning joints and protecting ligaments from damage. Fats are necessary to bring in all of the fat-soluble vitamins. So eliminating fats from your diet is a very bad idea for athletes. So let's take a look at the types of fats. I've been talking a little bit about these fats, triacylglycerols, triglycerides. These are essential animal energy storage system. We get triglycerides from plant and animal sources. Fats that are solid at room temperature are saturated fats, and oils are fats that are liquid at room temperature. Mostly these come from plant sources, things like olive oil and sunflower oil and corn oil. Oils are a better choice for an athlete's diet than animal fats in general. Fats can also be made into waxes, and you can see waxy layers. There's earwax and beeswax and waxy layers on the surface of plant leaves. Waxes are not a source of energy, so we're not going to look into them in terms of requirements for athletes. We don't need waxes. Steroids, such as cholesterol or hormones such as testosterone, which are made from fatty acids that are like cholesterol in structure, and other steroids are used for vision, and in plants they're used for photosynthesis. But these ring-structured fats are another essential part of our hormonal system for testosterone and estrogen and so forth. And phospholipids are components of all cell membranes. They're not really important as far as athletes are concerned. Let's take a look at the structure of steroid hormones. These are essential for performance. Cholesterol, which is synthesized in the body, can be turned into estrogen and testosterone via complex chemical pathways. Both estrogen and testosterone are essential for sports performance. So fatty fats in the steroid category are again an essential part of an athlete's diet. Phospholipids, we're not going to cover these. These are on the surface of cell membranes. And triglycerides, this is our main energy store. It has this glycerol moiety and then 3 fatty acids represented by these zigzag lines here. There are different types of fatty acids that can be attached, and the type of fatty acid determines what kind of fat you are looking at. So there's a common myth in sports that you need a high-fat diet to induce fat-burning enzymes so that you can burn more fats. While it is true that a diet high in fats does induce enzymes to help you burn fats, it's not the only way to do it. In fact, the best way to increase fat burning is to do low-intensity endurance training. Low-intensity endurance training will allow you to burn more fatty acids. So let's take a look at a chemist's view of fatty acids and triglycerides, our main store for fat energy. Here we can take a look at a fatty acid. A fatty acid is carbons and hydrogens. You can see many carbons and hydrogens with one carboxylic acid group. This is a fatty acid here. Fatty acids can be either saturated or unsaturated. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are unsaturated fatty acids and are particularly healthy. Many fatty acids are around 18 through about 21 carbons in length. So let's take a quick look at saturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids are like this. Here you can see every carbon has hydrogens attached to it in every position. There's the carboxylic acid that would be attached to the glycerol moiety over here. Now, polyunsaturated fat is different. A polyunsaturated fat has unsaturated double bonds. And this would be an example of a carbon-carbon double bond. There are 2 bonds here, so each carbon only has 1 hydrogen, but each carbon is double bonded to another carbon here. The difference between saturated and polyunsaturated fats is structural. Saturated fats have this very linear, straight kind of structure, where polyunsaturated fats have these bends, and they bend at the sites of the double bonds, the points of unsaturation. That means, for practical purposes, that polyunsaturated fats are liquids at room temperature. like this corn oil here, whereas saturated fats are solid at room temperature. These are less healthy for athletes and for people in general. Polyunsaturated fats, which mostly come from oils, mostly come from vegetable sources, are considerably more healthy. In fact, polyunsaturated fats are typically heart healthy, whereas saturated fats are typically heart unhealthy. And of course, an athlete wants their heart to be functioning in the best possible way it can, so a diet high in plant-based oils, polyunsaturated fats, is favorable for most athletes. So what are the USDA guidelines as far as fatty acids go? Let's take a quick look. The daily recommended intakes, or the dietary guidelines from USDA, state that people should ingest between 20 and 35% of their daily energy from fats. That would be 66 to 78 grams for a 2,000 kilocalorie a day diet. Now, most athletes will have far more kilocalories, require far more kilocalories than this in their diet, so they can ingest higher levels of fat in terms of grams of fat. But they should still stay in this percentage range. Somewhere between 20 and 35% of the calories should be coming from fat. Personally, I like to shoot for around 25% of my calories each day coming from fats. Now, there's some additional considerations. You also need to consider the amount of fat that is coming from saturated fatty acids. Those saturated or heart unhealthy fatty acids should make up less than 10% of your daily caloric intake. So if you're an athlete that requires 3,000 calories a day, 300 calories would be the maximum you should ingest from saturated fats. Athletes should not eat trans fat. Trans fat is unhealthy for the heart and dangerous. And milligrams in cholesterol should be kept under 300 milligrams per day. The latest recommendations actually state that cholesterol should be kept to as low as reasonably possible. Your body can make its own cholesterol, so ingesting cholesterol is not necessary for athletes. Do avoid getting too little fat. One rule of thumb would be to make sure that you have some fat with every meal. Fat with every meal will help you extract the fat-soluble vitamins from things like salads and fruits and vegetables. So it's a really good idea to make sure that there's a little bit of fat in every meal, and about a teaspoonful is about enough for most athletes. Now, there are the essential fatty acids. The essential fatty acids include linoleic acid, or an omega-6 fatty acid. You'll find this in vegetable oils and meats. The body cannot make omega-6 fatty acids, so this fatty acid must be eaten. Linolenic acid is an omega-3 fatty acid. Again, your body cannot make linolenic acid, the omega-3 fatty acid. You'll find alpha linolenic acid from many, many plant sources. One of the highest sources would be something like flax seeds. And you can ingest the omega-3 fatty acids, docosahexaenoic acid and icosapentaenoic acid from fish. And fish are a really good idea for most athletes to have at least 2 to 3 servings of fish per week. If you are not a fish eater, you don't like fish, then my suggestion would be that you choose to supplement with fish oil, something containing DHA and EPA. Both fatty acids are essential and are extremely important for athletes. Let's take a look at the structures of ALA, DHA, and EPA. You can see that they have unsaturated double bonds, so they have this bends in their structure, all three. These are named by the position of the double bonds. Omega-3 will have a double bond in the 3 position, 1, 2, 3 carbons. Omega-6 fatty acids will have the double bond appearing at the 6 position, but not at the 3 position. Alpha-linolenic acid is present in plant oils like flaxseed and soybean and canola oils.
DHA and EPA are present in fish and fish oils and krill oils. These are originally synthesized in microalgae. Microscopic algae are eaten by fish and krill, and these omega-3 fatty acids accumulate through the food chain and accumulate in krill and then in fish. And this is the structure of an omega-3 fatty acid. So the first carbon, the second carbon, the third carbon. There's the 3-position double bond. And this is an omega-6 fatty acid. First carbon, second carbon, third carbon, fourth carbon, fifth carbon, sixth carbon, double bond. This is an omega-6 fatty acid. Humans lack enzymes to be able to synthesize this double bond at the 3 position and the 6 position. For that reason, omega-3 and omega-6 are essential fatty acids. You must eat these. Omega-3 fatty acids are important to reduce inflammation. Both omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids are used to synthesize pro-inflammatory molecules such as prostaglandins and leukotrienes. The prostaglandins and leukotrienes formed by omega-6 fatty acids are approximately 10 times more inflammatory than prostaglandins and leukotrienes synthesized from omega-3 fatty acids. For that reason, to keep inflammation to a minimum when you're training, you want to be ingesting high levels of omega-3 fatty acids. If you're not eating fish 2 to 3 times a week, you should be ingesting omega-3 fatty acids in the form of a krill oil supplement or a fish oil supplement. And you should also be considering eating foods that are high in ALA, things like flaxseed and so forth. In the past, it was thought that humans had a diet that was very high in omega-3 and omega-6 compared to omega-6. The optimal ratio is thought to be about 4 omega-6s to every 1 omega-3 in our diet. That's thought to be the optimal ratio for humans. However, current Western diets are about 15 to 1 or 16 to 1, which is really pro-inflammatory diets. Western diet is really pro-inflammatory, and that's because it lacks enough plant-based material to provide ALA, and it lacks fish to provide more omega-3, DHA and EPA. Yeah, this is a typical intake, a US typical intake of EPA and DHA. Typically, Americans are intaking around 90 milligrams of omega-3. The USDA recommends around 400 to 500 milligrams of omega-3 daily. This should be the minimum target for athletes, but athletes can take in as much as 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams per day of EPA and DHA combined. So I would recommend athletes beat this target of 450 to 500 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids per day and aim for somewhere around 1,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA per day. So, when should you consider taking omega-3 supplements? As I've said, if you do not consistently eat fish, then it will be an important consideration. When your training is particularly stressful and you're undergoing high physiological strain with heavy training loads, when your muscles are sore and you're suffering from muscle inflammation, again, supplementing with omega-3s may be a good idea. If you've suffered an injury and you're managing pain and inflammation associated with that injury, increasing your EPA and DHA intakes is a good idea. And during periods of immobilization, in an effort to preserve muscle mass when you can't move because of some injury, or you can't move one limb because of an injury, again, taking in high levels of omega-3 can be very beneficial. Here we see that the benefits of omega-3s are overall health and well-being. It improves your membrane health, improves muscle, brain, and heart function. these omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, and they protect your muscle. They protect lean muscle mass, so you don't lose lean muscle mass. The anti-inflammatory effects are mostly seen with EPA, but DHA has these additional benefits, particularly with your brain and nervous system. So both EPA and DHA are recommended for athletes. If you are in the undesirable range, you're a non-fish eater, the dosage of omega-3 fats you should consider would be greater than 1,000 milligrams per day of EPA plus DHA combined. That would be about 3 to 4 standard fish oil capsules. If you're an irregular fish eater, say you eat fish maybe once a week, then 2 capsules, about 500 to 600 milligrams of EPA and DHA per day would be recommended. And if you're a regular fish eater, then there's no need to supplement with EPA and DHA. Just make sure you get plenty of plant-based ALA as well in your diet. So, some natural sources of omega-3 oils. Safflower oil is very high in omega-6, but let's take a look at the omega-3 containing oils. Soybean is a good source, 7% of omega-3 oils. Canola oil is an excellent source. Walnuts are a really healthy choice. Snacking on walnuts is a really healthy choice for most athletes to help get the omega-3 oils they need. Flax seeds, very high in ALA, excellent choice for getting omega-3 fatty acids. And of course, fish, a fantastic source for all the omega-3 oils you need. Let's take a little bit of a look at some of the composition of common foods in terms of saturated versus polyunsaturated fats. Saturated fats are in red. We want to reduce foods that have high levels of saturated fats and focus instead on monounsaturated, light blue, polyunsaturated, green, and polyunsaturated omega-3, yellow foods. So let's take a quick look down here. You can see coconut oil is a very poor choice because it's high in saturated fats and it contains very little mono and polyunsaturated fats. Butter, beef, palm oil, lard, chicken fat. These are some of our worst choices for athletes in terms of fats from foods. On the other hand, olive oil contains a lot of monounsaturated fats and some polyunsaturated fats. Canola oil is an excellent source of mono and polyunsaturated fats. Peanut oil as well, pretty good source. You can see safflower oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil, walnut oil. Walnut oil has the added benefit of these omega-3 fats, as does canola oil. Flaxseed oil, excellent source of polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, and omega-3 ALA. And fish oil, again, excellent source of monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and omega-3 fatty acids. So this gives you a pretty good idea of the sorts of foods you want to be targeting. You want to be targeting foods in the lower half, lower 3/4 of this diagram. It's important to remember that carbohydrate and fats constitute most of all the energy that you need for your sporting endeavors. The relative contribution of these fuels depends on a number of external factors, but particularly the intensity of the exercise. As the intensity goes down, fat burning goes up. As intensity goes up, carbohydrate burning goes up and fat burning goes down. Carbohydrate use is closely linked to energy needs, and fat use is not as tightly regulated. Fat oxidation is mainly influenced by the rate at which carbohydrates are being used. So as carbohydrates go up, fat use goes down. There is some evidence that suggests that increasing the rate at which we use fatty acids decreases the use of glycogen. the action that slows down muscle glycogen depletion may help prevent fatigue. However, ingesting fats prior to competition is a very poor idea. Artificially raising fats, either with a high-fat meal or infusion of triacylglycerols or fatty acids, does reduce the rate of glycogen breakdown for moderate intensity activity, but it does not enhance sport performance. In fact, quite the opposite. A carbohydrate meal prior to exercise enhances sports performance and fatty acid breakdown. So ingesting fats prior to working out is really not a good idea. Instead, fat should be spread throughout the day, focusing on those omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Ingestion of long-chain fatty acids during exercise is not desirable, primarily because it slows gastric emptying. It slows the rate at which your stomach will empty. A high-fat diet for 3 to 5 days does increase the availability of fats, but it also reduces the storage of glycogen. So eating a high-fat diet just prior to competition is not a good idea because it will decrease your storage of muscle and liver glycogen. So as a result, fatty acid oxidation does increase, but fatigue resistance decreases. So again, you want to be avoiding fats in those 3 to 5 days just prior to a major competition. As an interesting aside, carbohydrates and fat metabolism are quite closely linked. As an aside, there is a intensity maxima at which people burn the highest amount of fat compared to carbohydrates. So when you're looking at that maxima occurs at around 45% of maximum effort for men and around 50 to 55% of maximum effort for women. Women are better fat burners than men in the laboratory and when tested. So if you want to maximize your fat burning, you need to be working at very low intensities, somewhere around that 45 to 55% of maximum effort. So only very, very, very slow and easy running for most people or cycling. These are very low intensity workouts, but these are the most effective for inducing fat metabolism. Long-term diets, high in fats, result in adaptations that were thought to theoretically improve exercise tolerance for really long exercise efforts, things like Ironman races or ultra endurance races. However, what happens when these adaptations are occurring? There is increase in the fat burning enzymes, but there is decreased rates of liver glycogen synthesis and liver glycogen use during exercise, which means you're unable to use your carbohydrates as effectively. So there's a trade-off. You may become very good at burning fats, but you'll become worse at burning carbs. These adaptations often occur during endurance training. You can get the best of both worlds, not by eating a high-fat diet, but by doing low-intensity, long workouts where you increase fat oxidation by working out at fat max, which we saw on the previous slide. And working out at fat max will ultimately help increase your endurance. So here we look at what actually happens with a high-fat diet versus a high-carbohydrate diet in terms of endurance performance. This was done in a cycling test. This was athletes measured before with either a high-fat or a high-carbohydrate diet, and then after 2 weeks for high-fat high-carbohydrate diet, or after 7 weeks of a high-fat versus a high-carbohydrate diet. You can see that as these athletes trained, they got better in their endurance event, but you can see that athletes that were training on a high-carbohydrate diet dramatically increased their endurance compared to athletes who train on a high-fat diet. So there's definite advantages to training on a high carbohydrate diet compared to a high fat diet. And this is it. This summarizes those data. This is talking about the percentage of fat. It was a 62% fat diet versus a 65% carbohydrate diet. And they were followed up after 8 weeks. Time to exhaustion was what was being measured. The negative effects of a 7-week high-fat diet on performance are thought to be caused by suboptimal adaptations to training. Athletes that can train with a high carbohydrate diet adapt faster and get stronger, whereas athletes on a high fat diet do not adapt as quickly or as well to training. In terms of exercise performance, fasting increases fat metabolism and fat availability. Liver glycogen stores, however, are not maintained when a person is fasted, so fatigue resistance is impaired. Performance is not always impaired at low intensities of exercise, but at higher intensities of exercise, fasting does damage your performance and decreases performance. And this cannot be rescued by giving a person carbohydrates during the exercise. So whilst fasting is thought to be one method to increase fatty acid metabolism and fatty acid availability, and it is thought it might help improve endurance exercise, in actual fact, it does not. Fasting results in poorer performance, poorer exercise performance. So overnight fasting and then exercising is really not a good idea for most athletes. Most athletes, in fact, if they want to improve endurance exercise performance, need to do low intensity exercise around that fat max, around 45 to 55% of maximum effort for very, very long periods of time if they want to improve their endurance performance and at the same time improve their fatty acid burning whilst not damaging their glycogen stores and still being able to burn carbohydrates throughout that long endurance exercise. In other studies, well-trained individuals with high-fat diets don't improve in endurance performance. In fact, when studies are conducted looking at high-intensity exercise, those are all impaired by high-fat diets. So if you're in a sport that requires intense activity, do not want to have a high-fat diet. And essentially this means that most sports like cycling, soccer, rugby, football, basketball, high-fat diets are not suitable, they're not desirable, and they are poor for your health.